Okay. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining in. We're going to have a little bit of a ID workshop on Vireos, and as you can see by my title, it's going to be just a thrill a minute. It's like it's kind of like I have a talk. I'm giving a talk on the differentiating brown paper bags, but actually they've got a good personality, put it that way, and they sing nicely. But a lot of them are kind of plain. And let me just make if anyone is having a volume problem or can't see the screen, you should be seeing a PowerPoint thing right now, a big screen that says the plain ones. And we'll move on from there. There's a good bit of material to cover. I'm going to solicit questions between small groups of things. It'd probably be better to do it that way. And we've just got a pretty good bit of material to cover, and hopefully you guys will still be alive at the end of this presentation. But I'll try to not barrel through it, but I'll try to go through it efficaciously here. So, thanks for joining, and we'll start diving into Vireos in Alabama and Northwest Florida. Now, Jeff just mentioned muting the microphones. And here's a disclaimer about these photos. Not a single one of these videos or photos are mine. I've snatched them all from the internet. I had hoped that I've never done a PowerPoint presentation in my life. I've never done used PowerPoint in my life. I thought you could just click on all the things and have them display the file names, which I laboriously put all the locations and the photographers and all that stuff, but that doesn't really work. So, and we got some maps from things. So I'm just basically pulling stuff from all over the place. And thank you for anyone that's recognizes their photo, and everybody else. Hopefully, no one will mind and sue me. So, Vireos. You think of them basically as an American type thing. Western Hemisphere, and it is in general in terms of the true Vireos and most of the Vireos, but it includes the Virionidae includes a number of things other than that, like things that aren't even over this side of the pond, like shrike babblers and this weird Airpornis thing. But in Alabama and Northwest Florida, we've got 10 species. Well, I think it is 10 in Northwest Florida too, or the combination. But certainly in Alabama, there's 10 species officially recorded. 8 of these are regular birds and 5 breed, all in the true the Vireo genus, which is basically the true Vireos. The only one out of this list over here, and one thing I forgot to do, can you guys see my cursor?
Yes. You can.
Okay. I forgot to change my cursor here, so hopefully you can see that. But here's the list of things that have been recorded in Alabama. The only one that's on the category B, the old hypothetical list, is Plumbeous. It just has a single site record. So what I'm going to do, we're going to do a lot of these, and we're going to add in a few dessert lollipops at the end, but I'm not going to delve into for your all's for the mercy.
Are we muted?
Somebody's anyway, for the to have mercy on y'all and not extend this another half hour, I'm not going to delve into the old solitary complex of blue-headed and Plumbeous and Cassins in any kind of meaningful way, because that's a whole different world of its own. So how do you tell a Vireo from other stuff? Well, basically it's a chunky little bird, generally chunky. Most of them are fairly heavy, fairly chunky, with large feet. They have fairly thick legs. Often Vireos hold their toes together, which is a weird little fact, but if you might not have noticed it in the field, but warblers often spread their toes. Vireos often hold their front 3 toes together. But the really big thing on the structure is the Vireo bill. It's thicker than, say, warblers or a lot of other birds proportionally, and it's got a little hook on the end. Now, some of the species, it's not like, it doesn't slap you in the face, but it's there. They're often very kind of slow and deliberate feeding, and they sing, a lot of them just sing like crazy, sort of all day long. And they often separate into 2 large groups. at least the ones in our area, of whether they got wing bars or not. And usually the ones with wing bars have spectacles also. And these are the ones in that group. And the ones that don't have wing bars usually are eye-lined. So we've got eye-lined non-wing barred birds, and we've got wing barred birds usually with spectacles. Now, vireos, there's a lot of subtleties here, and you're going to hear me say a lot of usuallys and normallys and typicallys, and you'll see that in the slides. There's a lot of overlap of characters. You can get fooled on some of these things, both by structure and looking at the feathering characters. So you got to consider lighting of what you're looking at. Just is the foliage causing something to look more green or yellow than it really is? Brief or distant views sometimes a lot of times will lead you into trouble. A bad angle of view, the bird turning in different ways. You got to spend some time to get a feel of the structure and the coloration and stuff of this bird. A lot of times you got to spend at least a little bit of time really studying it. There's also a tremendous amount of variation in these birds within a species, and a lot of features overlap. So it can be between some of the species groups, it could be kind of a muddled mess, but you want to try to use as many characters of both feathering and structure as possible in dealing with this. So first we're going to start with these wing-barred, usually spectacled vireos. And the prototypical one in Alabama is the white-eyed vireo. Well known, it's ubiquitous all over Alabama. It breeds almost basically over the whole state. Winters mostly in the south, mostly on the coast, and a little bit in the coastal plain, but not so much up north. And in Alabama, there are the six subspecies. We have 2 that breed here. It's a scrubby habitat bird. I mean, it's found all over the place, but except the thing it really doesn't you don't find it much in is deep, solid forest. But anywhere there's edge or open air, any kind of mixed habitat, you will often hear a white-eyed vireo. The only thing in terms of their molt that's a little weird is the preformative, which used to be the first basic molt, the thing that juveniles molt out of and go into their sort of into the winter type thing. They call it preformative now. It often includes most or all of the primaries, which is a little weird for a young bird to molt all or even most of its primaries. That's a strange thing. So white-eyeds are sort of chunky birds, kind of thick-necked, sort of thick builds, moderate this, moderate that, but it's not so much a slender bird. It's not enormous, but it's kind of chunky. And of course, a white-eyed vireo has a white iris, but that's only as an adult. So the immatures, it takes sort of into November or so to start getting white in there really well. And sometimes you can tell the younger ones, even in the spring, they're a little duller. Typically, they've got sort of an olive head here. Like I said, can you guys, against a picture, do a thumbs up if you can see my cursor? Okay. Can you see that? Okay, great. All right. So a lot of times there's a contrasting sort of grayish nape in the sides of the neck here. Then you get back to olive again. Of course, the big thing with the white eyes are really bright white in the adults, are really bright yellow spectacles here, very thick here above the lowers, but also circling the eye. Now, the catch here, and that's going to get into our next species, is that young birds usually show a little yellow there if you study them enough, but sometimes they don't show, they can't actually show no yellow in the lowers of any consequence. So you got to be careful about that. And we'll get into that in a second. They have 2 pretty boldly formed wing bars generally, especially on a bird past a juvenile stage. Yellow breast and flanks with contrasting with the white underneath, so it's not just smooth and uniform. There's sort of a patch here. A lot of times you can just see even this part of the bird and in a thicket and pretty well tell it's going to be a white-eyed vireo. Now, here's some of these young ones. The bird on the left, a little bit of yellowish whitish up front. You can tell it's kind of a ragged juvenile looking bird. This bird also looks sort of juvie looking, but you can see it's not very yellow here. Nice wing bars though, but not very yellow at all. Again, here's a bird with nice wing bars on the left with hardly any yellow at all in the lores. This bird has you can tell it's a young bird, but again, it's sort of grayish spectacles. And here's obviously on the left a really young bird, but it's just basically whitish gray all the way around. And the bird on the right is essentially so. Some of that may just be washed out in the photo, but again has some strong wing bars. So you got to be careful with these white-eyed vireos, the young ones, and into the fall a little bit. Fall migration, you got to especially be really careful about them. Now, the voice, everybody here knows the White-Eyed Vireo song. It's all over the place. Even now, you're hearing them. That classic thing with either a chip, either first and end, or one side or the other, Chickaperio chick, and then these little nasally calls, or even like a house wren like chatter. Now, at this point, I have a variety of videos, so I don't have them actually embedded in the PowerPoint, because not all of them would embed, but I'm going to show one here that just gives you an idea. Now, hopefully you guys can hear this. Okay, thumbs up if you heard it okay? Okay, all right. That's what I make sure the volume's coming across all right. So
yeah, we can hear really well.
What we're going to do here is when I go to a video, I'm going to just pop over into that, and then we'll pop back into the next one. So that's white-eyed. That's sort of a species you need to know well and learn well and study it, because even though it's just a white-eyed vireo, you need to know this one to know some of the others, particularly this next guy we're talking about, Bell's Vireo. Now, here's a nice picture, actually, by one of our own lists this fall, Marilyn Steelman. Took this in the shell mounds this September. But in Alabama, bells are regularly occur, mostly in the fall, and much more on the coast. You can see the sort of the periods here that they're in. There's one June record, and there's one strange January record that were actually pretty good, seemed like pretty good records. Most of these, you can see 51 Gulf Coast and 15 inland, so it's a much more of a coastal thing. But this bird is a Midwestern bird going down into the Southwest. It's pretty close to white-eyed vireo. It's basically the closest thing we've got to the Latin American greenlets in terms of the way it looks and acts. There's 4 subspecies. Here we would expect what they call Eastern, but it's really the Midwestern is the dominant belly-eye form, belly-E, and which is a little bit different. It wags its tail like a palm warbler instead of flipping it around so much. It's a little bit shorter tail than the Western birds. They talked about splitting this, but that got kicked out, but it always could come up again. I don't know that we've ever had any type of southwestern one here. Molt, nothing that particularly special. Scrubby type stuff in breeding season, riparian. They are found a little bit up along the Mississippi River, so but we haven't had them proven to breed here. It's a really active, busy little bird. Now, one thing about a Bell's Vireo, and you need to pay attention when you talk about even thinking about identifying a Bell's Vireo, you need to be looking about how big is it, what's the shape, because this bird's a small bird. It's a small, slender bird, relatively long tail, kind of small head. It's more warbler-like, okay? It almost could remind you of a kinglet, but here's a kinglet on the right, here's a Bell's Vireo on the left. Kinglet has a different face pattern. You got the broken eye ring above. It's got the dark bar on the wing. Bill's completely different, a little short, tiny, little thin thing, whereas this at least does have a little bit of a hook, but it's certainly thicker than a kinglet. But it almost reminds you of that with a little bit like a slightly long-tailed, more elongated kinglet. So the big thing in telling Bell's Vireo is telling it from white-eyed. And Bells will always have a dark iris. We just talked about the shape. They tend to have a sort of a grayish head and greenish upper parts. I'm talking here more specifically about eastern birds. Western birds tend to be a lot grayer, but underneath is variable amount of yellow. Some of them are quite yellow, some of them aren't so much, but the face pattern generally is pretty weak. It's not that strong pattern you see in a lot of white eyes, but again, think of those immatures that I showed you. There's often, it's often sort of a tug of war between either having spectacles or having an eye line. Usually there is a bit of an eye line, and usually sometimes there's a bit of a spectacle look, and sometimes it looks like both. So you get kind of an odd hybrid between spectacles and eye lines. The wing bars are, you could have two, you may just have one, you may barely have any. Usually this top one on the median coverts is grayer or a little buffier or just not quite white. Often the edging on the back of the bird, on the wings here, the wing edging, the tertials and stuff are a little more subdued than a white-eyed. Again, a real small, slender little thing. And so here you got bells on the left, white-eyed on the right, chunkier bird, thicker bill. This is clearly a white-eyed on the right here, but you know, with all that white eye and the yellow, bright yellow there. But bells is not going to have yellow on the lowers like that. But you see the face pattern here on the left is much more muted, and the wings are more muted. Wing bars are certainly more muted, that kind of thing. And here's on the left a Bell's Vireo. It's kind of a weak face pattern, kind of a plain little bird, fairly yellow underneath, but not. And sometimes it's on the flanks and it's contrasted, other times it doesn't. And here's a young white-eyed, which has the weird wing bars until you can tell it's fluffy, but not all of them are fluffy and obviously a juvenile. So again, this pattern right here, you got to look at the whole thing. And sometimes juveniles are a little bit slimmer and smaller, so it's not always just slam dunk. I mean, I've seen plenty. I've certainly had times when I wasn't sure what I was looking at. And especially with a view that wasn't wonderful. And sometimes these birds don't give you a great view. Bells are good at hiding. But here on the left is a Bell's Vireo. Got the sort of more of a spectacled look here. A young white-eyed on the right. From behind, like I said, usually, a lot of times the markings are edged, particularly in the fall where they're freshly molted, but they're not quite as bright as a white-eyed a lot of times. Here's another look at that dull kind of little plain face. Spectacles, grayish white spectacles here, but more of an eye-line look too than you get with a white-eyed. And from behind, here's this muted wing bars, the top one really dull. And you can see that better on the spread wing there. So here's some more bells. Again, this bird almost looks more like an eyeline vireo than spectacles. And another one that's just sort of more of a spectacled type and barely had, you can see wing bars here, but these are partly covered by the flank feathers, but grayish than white. So Bell's Vireo, the song, we don't hear them much. We don't hear them vocalized much. Not sure I've ever heard of Bell's Vireo in Alabama. Sometimes, especially inland in the spring, they'll sing, but I don't hear them call a lot. Maybe some people do, but I just don't. And here's a video of a Bell's Vireo singing, but the thing with the song is it goes up and it comes down. It's real fast. So here is an example of a Bell's Vireo. Let me see if I can make this, do this and try to. Okay, so that's basically the Bell's Vireo type of thing. That it's pretty fairly constant. Whereas white-eyed Vireo can sing all kinds of stuff. It include mimicry and just almost every white-eyed Vireo is a little bit different, though the patterns are similar. Bells are, it's not always exactly like this, but that's a pretty typical Bell's Vireo sound. Okay, yellow-throated Vireos. First of all, you can unmute if you need to. Any questions on that? I know I'm rolling through it pretty quickly, but there's a lot to cover here. So, bells and white-eyes that's a challenge. And honestly, if I look, it bothers me a lot when when there's a report of a bells that doesn't include a pretty good talk about size and structure and actions and that kind of stuff. You need to pay attention to that kind of stuff. It's not just I saw a whitish eye ring or a whitish spectacle. So they can be more subtle than you think. But any questions on that pair? Okay, so we will move now to yellow-throated. I'm just going to talk about yellow-throated very briefly. We're not going to go in depth on this. A fairly common bird in Alabama, pretty widespread, breeds across most of the state, not all the way down to the Gulf itself, but down pretty far on the Gulf Coast. And there are a few. It's pretty much comes in early spring and it leaves in sort of mid fall. And rise big time in late March to early April. And there are a few winter occurrences, which probably most of those seem like they're pretty good records. So those are the ones that I feel pretty comfortable with. And that's why this is where I'm going to get into the winter records. And the reason I'm even bringing up yellow-throated, because you think yellow-throated warbler, yellow-throated vireo, how hard could it be? Well, in the wintertime, you report a yellow-throated vireo in the winter. There are some people that just don't believe they exist, basically winter yellow-throated vireos. So it's a bird that, that rarely winters in North America. It winters in Central America, down into northern South America, and a little bit in the Caribbean. And this isn't a bird that hangs around here very much. So in the weird season, in the winter season, you do have to really pay attention, because pine warbler is the one that can throw you, because a pine warbler can look like almost anything. The ones that would be bothering you would be not the little gray jobs that really cause problems with identification in most cases, but it's the bright ones that would bother you. Now, vireo, get back to shape again. It's a chunkier bird, heavy bill, got a little hook on the end, but sometimes you got to get a good look to see the hook, but it's definitely a heavier bill. Even though pine warbler's got a thick bill for a warbler, this is way thicker. Often yellow-throated vireos cock their tail up, kind of like a chestnut-sided warbler does. I don't see pine warblers doing that much. It might transiently do that, but yellow-throated vireos do that a lot. And of course, the legs are stouter, and as in typical of vireos, they are bluish. Whereas pine warblers can have dark legs, but you shouldn't see pinkish legs or even flesh-colored legs so much on a vireo. I mean, it might rarely happen, but not much. So the coloration also is a little bit different. This particular bird doesn't have the yellow going on the flanks that much, but a yellow-throated vireo should not have the yellow coming way down here like this bird. This is a pretty bright male pine warbler. The other thing is yellow-throated vireos they have more obvious spectacles. Pine warblers generally have some sort of streaking beneath, kind of spread out like this on each side of the breast and going down on the flanks. Yellow-throated vireos can have a smudging down here, but usually it should not be distinct streaking. If you have streaking, it is very unlikely to be a yellow-throated vireo. And the vireo also has more of a olive green versus gray back and gray rump, whereas the pine warbler's got more of a basically olive green back and rump. You see the rump here on this, and this is gray on the over here on the left on the yellow-throated vireo. So that's just a quick thing on yellow-throated vireos. I'm not going to go into that a lot but it's just more of a winter record type thing. All right, so like I said, I'm not going to delve into the Solitarius complex, the old Solitary Vireo complex. Solitary blue-headed, it's been split into blue-headed, Plumbeous, and Cassins. They can be a nightmare differentiating those, and there's a lot of variation, and we'll just that can be done another time. So, but here's a typical blue-headed vireo. On the right, in Alabama, it's in North Alabama, it's mostly in the mountains in terms of breeding. In the South, basically it winters in South Alabama, and you've got a few in North Alabama in the winter now. They seem to be increasing a little bit, but this is a typical blue-headed vireo. Now, notice these green wing edges right here, the secondaries and primaries, a little, not so much the tertials, but they have all this green wing edging. See all that right there? When we talk about Plumbeous Vireo, here's a Plumbeous. You don't see that. It's gray, white. It could have yellow underneath, but it shouldn't have green and yellows and greens on the wing edges. And also, you have to pay a little bit of attention between this and Cassids on how well differentiated the cheek and the throat are. But that's about all I'm going to say on this. Here's a Plumbeous. We have one site record that has been accepted in Alabama by the Records Committee. There's a couple of others that probably were pretty good, probably were legit, but didn't quite go into the detail needed. The committee didn't feel comfortable. There is a specimen from Louisiana. It certainly is possible, probably more likely in the fall, but it's a mega rare bird in this part of the world. All right, so non-wing barred eye-lined vireos. So these things are going to fall into smalls and large, just to make things simple, or as simple as we can get. The prototypical bird in this category is red-eyed vireo. It's common, it's ubiquitous, one of the most abundant passerine birds in North America, or the world maybe. I mean, there's a lot of red-eyed vireos. It's abundant in deciduous forests in eastern North America. Breeds in a wide swath across Canada, or at least southern Canada, and across the U.S. It's all over Alabama. Again, maybe not right in the sound of the surf, but it's pretty much all over any kind of proper habitat in Alabama. Likes forest. Here's the date range in Alabama. Comes in, the big peak is last of April, 1st of May. There's some early winter, probably pretty legitimate records, but this is extremely rare bird in North America, and maybe not in terms of wintering in that North America. This is a bird that goes to South America and doesn't hang around here much. Now, in Alabama, there are two subspecies. We have the nominate bird, the olivaceous. It's related, it used to be lumped with this Cuban Vireo of South America, and it's very similar to that. The Chivas tend to be a little more yellow, but it's a very similar bird, and it breeds down there. And our birds actually go down there in the winter, so they all sort of mix together. The molt, it can kind of start here and finish down in the winter. And it really likes deciduous or at least mixed forest in the breeding season. In migration, it can be kind of wherever it wants to be. So red-eyeds are pretty large vireos, long wings, long bill, long body. The crown tends to be kind of flat. Transiently, it may have a round crown, and you see a photo, and it may catch it at a certain time. And that's the thing, that photos are kind of strange, because you catch birds at a certain angle or they raise their crown up, or they do this and that, and they can change their posture. So you got to be a little careful about that in terms of quick views. But the iris, as you would expect, is red, or at least reddish, but in immatures, it's dark until the winter, and some of the spring immatures are darker than the adults, but they're still definitely reddish. Normally, this facial pattern is really well defined. It's a stripe-headed or stripy-faced bird. A little less for juveniles, or maybe a bird you catch at a weird stage of molt. But this gray crown, nicely defined, kind of with usually a nice blackish line separating this. Sometimes a little less obvious, but usually pretty obvious. Bold supercilium, nice dark line, well defined going through the eye, that eye line, and occasionally it can kind of come down from the lowers just a little bit. But the crown, that grayish crown, tends to contrast with this greenish yellow upper parts. Occasionally, some of the very fresh young birds can have a bit of a wing bar, a trace of one, but not so much. That's pretty, you don't see that a lot. The yellow. Now, there's a lot of variability in yellow on a red-eyed vireo. Some of them, in the spring particularly, don't have a lot of yellow. Some of them have a lot of yellow. Some of them have yellow. Most of them have yellowish, at least, on the under tail covers. But this would come up in the flanks, and this is actually more of is green. It's not bright yellow, but bright yellow generally kind of stops at least somewhere down in this general range here. We'll go into that in a few minutes. But it's much more yellow in the fall when they're fresh than they are in the spring. And in flight, you kind of get used to the shape of these things in flight because you see them flying by, especially at the coast. You see them a lot, and they have kind of dirty, dingy yellow underwing coverage. So here's red-eyed vireo. That's a bird to get used to, get accustomed to. Like I say, big build, long. Now this one has a round crown because he's raising his feathers up. But here's that dark stripe. And here's just a few more images of the typical little pale yellow here. Just a few more shots of this bird. So here's a bird that's probably a younger bird, and it's got, because it's kind of a less obvious red eye, and you can see it's a little more subdued on this black stripe. This one's a lot less well marked than some of them, but young birds can be like this. So you got to be a little bit careful. And here's a really young bird, as you can tell, and there's almost no stripe at all here, but he'll get out of that plumage pretty quickly. Okay. Singing. Red-eyed vireos love to sing. They sing all the time. And so not in migration, but they do sing in migration, but on the breeding grounds, they just sing all day long. And it's a standard to compare a lot of other vireos by. It's the usual phrases, short phrases with pauses. With a lot of these, it's sort of a going up, going down type of thing. With the red-eyed, you tend to have a little more internal complexity, so that if you see my cursor, this part, the CUE going up, and then maybe some people call it a sigh in between of a couple little things, and then a TU down at the end. So it's like going up, a little muddling here, and going back down. They can often sing pretty quickly, and not a lot of pauses in between. Some pause, but sometimes they slow down, particularly in the middle of the day. So they'll sometimes sing a little or sing slowly, and not in terms of how fast they deliver this, but in terms of how many phrases per minute that they churn out. And they have this nasally, whining, descending call that everybody's heard, that gray type of thing. And a lot of these vireos make a ton of different calls, so I'm just a lot of times talking about the most obvious ones. So here's a red-eyed vireo singing. All right, so that's the typical pattern of a red-eyed vireo song. You hear that. There's some variation in it, but it's that you got to get used to that tone, that how high pitched is it. It's a sweet sound. It's not burry. It's a moderately full sound. So next we're going to go into that's sort of red-eyed is the prototype for the large for the eye-lined non-wing barred vireos. So now we're going to go. That was one of the bigger ones, though. It's in the large group. Now we're going to consider the two small non-wing barred eye-lined birds. So the first one up at bat is the little Philadelphia vireo, which we get in the fall mostly. It is a bird that comes across kind of is circumgulf in migration. We don't get a great deal of stuff coming across in the spring, so it's actually not You do get some in the spring, particularly somewhat at the coast, but also in North Alabama, right, especially the Tennessee Valley. But you don't get lots of them in the fall. When you really expect Philadelphia's is in the fall. So they breed all the way across here, mostly southern Canada, but then head southwest like this and winter down in Central America. So we have one record that seemed like a pretty legitimate record for nearly the first week of August, but generally they're at least, you think about them being really coming in late September and early October. Just a fun fact, it's the only North American passerine that could either have 9 or 10 primaries, depending on the individual bird. If it has a 10th primary, it's a little vestigial primary, a little tiny one, but it's a strange thing to have somebody have a passerine that has, a variable number of primaries. There's no subspecies. Say it's a Western Gulf migrant. It goes across the Gulf a little bit here, but not in our area like the migrants we're used to. And then it also goes around the Gulf. So it's kind of zinging kind of in a line like this across the Western Gulf. So first of all, you got to tell, is it a warbler or a vireo? Because they can look kind of like Tennessee warblers. So the Philadelphia Vireo, we've got to get back to what's a Vireo. It's a thicker hooked bill. Now, it's not a huge bill. It's not a giant, thick hooked bill, but it is a thicker bill with a little bit of a hook. They have longer tails than Tennessee's, a little bit thicker legs. Again, very sort of bluish gray, bluish, kind of darkish blue-gray. Olive green upper parts like this. And they also usually have some sort of yellowish wash, often have a yellowish wash on the under tail coverts. Whereas Tennessee warblers got a real thin little bill, a short tail, like that, a much shorter tail than a Philly does, and just a narrow postocular stripe instead of this broader thing that you get. Very bright grassy green upper parts, but pretty much in most birds, and usually pretty white undertail coverage, at least barely washed yellow. So here's on the left a Philly, fairly typical Philly here. On the right is a Tennessee warbler, and you can see the shape differences here. Thicker bill, there's a tiny hook there, a little more of a defined, much a thinner eye line right there, and again, like on this bird, has got the white undertail coverage, whereas the Philly has at least some yellowish here. Now, the angle of view can make it look funny. This bird, is a Philadelphia Vireo, but it looks very pointy-billed. I think at a first glance, especially with that sort of a trace of a wing bar there, you can think, oh, is that just a Tennessee warbler? But here's the same bird showing the hooked, thicker bill, and clearly a Philadelphia Vireo, but here's angle of view. It matters. So you got to watch the birds a little bit. So how do you tell them from red eyes? Well, they are shorter birds. They're more compact. They're kind of a chunky little thing that's pot-bellied and shorter tailed, a little smaller build. They're not going to have a red iris, but not all red eyes, of course, in the fall particularly don't have that. But even in the spring, a little bit, they're darker. They have a soft face pattern generally. Sometimes they're a little more defined, but tends to be the typical thing is a soft, kind of a sweet face with a lot of soft edges and more a paler gray, not that bold, stripy look of the red-eyed. Now, it also does not have a really bold, in any way, a black stripe along the edge of the crown. And also, they will have, to some degree or another, and this is a particularly pale bird, and I think this is a spring bird, will have yellow going across the lower throat and breast, which red-eyed does not have. Red-eyed can have a lot of yellowish wash underneath, but it shouldn't so much have this yellow coming across all the way across in the middle there. Here's a red-eyed here. You can see the difference. It has this lateral crown stripe, really bold thing, much longer bird. Of course, this one has a bright red eye, makes it really easy, but it's a very contrasty face pattern and a whitish central breast. So Here's a red-eyed on the right, filly on the left. These birds are particularly different because this is a pretty large-billed red-eyed. Some red-eyed vireos are a little smaller bills, especially younger ones. So there is some variation in the size of red-eyed bills, but fillies have much smaller bills. And here's the yellow and the more gentle face pattern. Dark in the lores here. We'll get into that in a little bit. Another filly, more defined face pattern, but still not that bold look of a red-eyed, and a lot of yellow on this one. Here's another sweet-faced little bird. I always just love seeing them. They just seem so gentle to me. It's always a thrill in the fall. But here, got those toes together. Note that, people. And it's something that is sort of weird. Now, sometimes they do spread them apart, but Vireos often hold their toes together. Here's another one, a little less yellow underneath, but again, typical sort of face pattern of a filly. And smaller bill. And there's another look there. So by voice, these get real tricky. Now, with a lot of experience, you can call them, and I have called them, and other people call them, but I still try to see the bird, because red-eyed vireos, there's a lot of variation in red-eyed vireos. And if you, I would, first of all, you don't hear them that much. And they're just something that you probably want to chase down and try to see and confirm. It'd be good. But in general, it's similar to a red-eyed vireo, the little phrases. There's usually more pauses between. It's a little bit thinner, a little bit higher. So the tone's a little different. So if you're used to red-eyes, you may notice that it's just a little different. And it's got some little soft call notes, nasally kind of notes. Now here is a Philadelphia singing. Well, that was a shorter video than I thought. Let me try this again. Yeah, it wasn't at the start. Okay, so generally a little higher pitched, a little bit more, a little thinner, but it's pretty close. It's pretty close. So try to track those down. So the next culprit, and we're going to do this as a pair, Philadelphia versus warbling, because these things get really hard sometimes. In fact, they get extremely hard at times. Sometimes they're obvious, and other times they're baffling. Warbling Vireo, this is a sort of a standard Warbling Vireo, and we're going to get into a little bit about it. Much more a western bird than an eastern. It's certainly found in the east, but it excludes a lot of the southeast, basically. I mean, it's just sort of like this whole lower right corner of the country is not very well covered in Warbling Vireos. This is a rather generous projection of the Alabama range. It has bred, we think it has been found in the summer. We think breeding quite a few times, but it's very erratic, very localized, and not much more likely to find along the Tennessee River, say up at Lauderdale County or something like that, or Colbert County. But it's not an expected bird breeding. It's always an exciting thing to find a Warbling Vireo. There used to be a pair that nested regularly at Waterloo, about as far northwest as you can go. So, but it's Warbling Vireo is a rare but regular migrant, spring and fall, most common on the Gulf and in Tennessee Valley. Also found in the mountain region some. It's kind of expected. It's an early migrant in the fall, kind of early fall a lot of times. And it splits into two kind of groups. There's an eastern nominate race, the Gilvis subspecies, and then the western Swainsonii group has several subspecies, but they keep talking about maybe trying to split these into actual species at some point. So, it's worth paying attention to. So basically, sort of this hunk is maybe one species, and then some of the rest of this hunk is another species. Possibly. There's some molt differences between Eastern's a little. There's some differences here, like outline, but it's just a little bit larger build, a little more yellow but low. Songs a little more musical, and the habitat is often Warbling Vireos. It's adaptable, particularly in the west, but often in terms of breeding, it's usually near water in the east. It's often big trees near water. Okay, so how do you tell a Warbling Vireo from a red-eyed Vireo? That's a real. Let's start with that, and then we'll worry about Philadelphia's. Warbling Vireo tends to have a from a red-eyed. Not from a Philadelphia, but from a red-eyed is a little shorter and usually has a shorter bill. Now, again, there's variation. Some of the eastern birds are much larger billed than the western ones, and presumably we get all eastern birds here, but who knows if we've had a few westerns slip in there, but who knows? But we haven't documented that to my knowledge. The bill is a little shorter winged. It's just not as quite as elongated of a bird as a red-eyed. The iris is always dark. There's less facial contrast than a red-eyed. You don't have any kind of real defined black stripe right here on the right above the supercilium on the edge of the lateral crown stripe. It's a little more blended face. It's not quite. A lot of red-eyeds have sort of more division there, and the lowers are often paler. But we'll be talking about lowers because that's a field mark that's really big in the guides, and you got to be real careful with that. But in general, there's less facial contrast. And the supercilium, here's a red-eyed, again, just as a contrast, very bold through here, black line, very bold. Usually, a lot of times it's a lot more defined right there, but it's a longer bird, longer bill. And of course, this one has a red eye. Philadelphia, however, often if you're going to tell it from Philadelphia, then it gets a little murky because most of the time they're not so bad to tell apart, but there's some individuals that can be tough and you really need to study them. So Phillies, we're back to Phillies now. This is Philly on the right, is usually a more, if you watch it long enough and pay attention to shape and stuff, it's a little more, compared to a warbling, a little more stubby, pot-bellied, round-headed, or usually even a smaller bill than a warbling, shorter-tailed. We'll talk about the undertail covers in a couple of minutes. Often a bluish-gray crown, usually dark. Usually Philly has dark lowers and often kind of broader right at the eye and kind of tapering this way, so a forward wedge. Whereas, and also has a stronger eye line than a warbling posterior to the eye. And the supercilium often fades pretty quickly after the eye. Sometimes it goes a little farther, like in this bird. Whereas, and here's another Philly here, another nice dark lowers. Of course, this one has the big thing is, in just a second, I'll tell you about, we'll talk about the underparts, but the upper parts, there's usually olive green, should be olive green upper parts in most Phillies, whereas warblings can or may not have that. So if you see a Philly, it should have some olive green up above. Some warblings are really just pale. Now, the big thing, though, is the underparts. There's a huge difference, and this is a big factor here besides just structure and some of these other points. When there's variable amount of yellow underneath on a Philadelphia Vireo, but if you have it, it's going to be brighter right in here, right in the lower throat and breast centrally. And sometimes you can't see that well from the side. You need a good look, and in the spring, that's a lot less. Here's another Philadelphia. You can see that nice yellow throat. Whereas warbling, if it is yellow, and some of them are quite yellow actually, it's not going to have this, the yellow is going, it might have yellow sort of a pale wash all over, but it's going to be brighter down on the flanks or the undertail covers. So it's different ends of the bird that tend to have the strongest yellow, if there is yellow there. So here's a warbling, a little longer bird, flatter crown, longer bill, a little longer tail. You can't see it very well on this bird. Kind of a dull crown. The lowers are often pale, but they're not always pale. And often, sometimes they're broadest at the bill. They have a backwards pointing wedge, which is not as usual for Phillies. And a lot of times you have this big arched eyebrow that continues pretty obviously behind the eye, which is more typical of warbling than Philadelphia, and it's less definition, less firmly defined posterior eye stripe. So here's a nice warbling vireo, kind of a dull bird all over. It's, you know, not, here's, like I said, the yellow on the bird is going to be brighter on the flanks and undertail than it is so much on the breast and throat, more uniform wings. So on the right's a filly. This is a pretty bright filly. This was pretty obvious. Nice dark lores on that, but here's a nice pale face, typical white breasted, a little slight yellowish here, but basically a nice arched eyebrow, big supercilium, and no dark. Neither of them have a dark, good, firm, dark line there like a red-eyed does. But on the left, you know, this bird's pretty pale. This is a spring bird on the left of Philadelphia. And you look at that and go, wow, that's a warbling vireo. Well, actually, this is actually a hard bird. But I've seen other photos of this bird, and it is indeed a Philadelphia. It's got yellow on the lower throat, central breast. It does have a pretty well-defined forward-facing wedge here, more defined face. It kind of fades out right there. Now, some warblings fade out also, but see how pale the lores are? The breast is white in the middle, right, like that. And the bill's a little bit, this is actually a little bit longer, rangier bird. On the left, again, a Philadelphia with all this yellow, and this one actually has a pretty good little eyeline, supercilium behind the eye. This is where you got to use multiple factors. You've got to look at a bunch of different things on the bird. Notice both these birds have closed feet together. This is on the right is actually one of Bala's shots from Monsanto as a warbling in the fall, I think. But very bright yellow, lot of yellow underneath. But notice it's not here. It's not like the Philadelphia. The pattern's different. The placement's different. Same thing here. Pretty pale bird. I just thought it was a little overexposed. But again, where the yellow is more yellow, brighter yellow here. And here the brighter yellow is here. So this is a pretty well-defined warbling vireo, but it's still a warbling. Here's a few more shots. Nice big eyebrow here. A little bit of a dark lower, so this dark lower thing you got to be really careful about. If it's just completely pale, it's probably a warbling vireo, but don't blow it off as a filly just because it's got some dark in the lores. Here's another warbling with a nice white throat and big eyebrow. A little bit, you can see a bigger bill than a Philadelphia. See a small bill, and it's just a thicker bill here. And here's another shot at one. Nice, you know, a little bit of a dark line there, but mostly pale, and again, white right in the middle. But you need to, if you looked at this from the side, you might just catch this stuff and think it's yellow. You need to get a good look at it, particularly in the spring. In the spring, Philadelphia is going to be incredibly pale. Now, this looks like a fairly pitiful photograph, but I thought it was a nice example from an old 1981 Continental BirdLife article on vireos. And on the left's a filly, and on the right is a warbling vireo. And you can see the difference here in the relative. Here's a shorter tail, long under tail coverage, and here's this more of a longer tail and a little bit relatively shorter under tail coverage. So they do have little shape differences, little structural differences there. All right, warbling vireo. Song, very obvious song. If you hear it, I don't hear it nearly enough, but it's a long warbling song, rapid warbling song, and often ends with an up note. And Eastern's more musical, and once it gets going, doesn't have pauses, and it mews a little bit. So I'm going to play a warbling vireo singing. Let's see if we can get this going here. Or try to. All right, so that's warbling vireo, and so now we're going to go to a little bit more rare things, and we'll end with a couple of large eyeline vireos that are one is regular and rare and the other is incredibly rare, and then we'll just quickly bang through a few real crazy birds. So Black-whiskered Vireo, always looking for them in Dauphin Island or Fort Morgan on the spring. Caribbean bird, basically mid to southern Florida, coastal. You see them here in the spring mostly. There's 5 records of 7 birds basically from July to October. And but it's expected in low numbers, especially with southeast winds in Alabama. It winters down in the southern Caribbean. The northern birds move down into the southern Caribbean and into South America in the wintertime. That's why you get these ones coming up and shooting over past their breeding grounds and getting up into Alabama. Basically, it's in Florida, mangroves and hammocks, but it's more forested down in the south. Black whisker. So compared to a red-eyed, it's generally a little bigger, a little larger build or hooked bill, kind of a big bruiser of a bird. They do have red eyes, or at least reddish eyes. Same thing with red-eyes. The immatures are dark into the winter, but there are the red-eyed, black-whiskered, and yellow-green all have reddish eyes as adults. So usually black-whiskers have a duller face pattern, less prominence of some of these markings right here. Generally, with a good view, you can see whiskers if you spend enough time looking for it. I mean, we'll get into a little bit about I'll show you some pictures of some weird red-eyes or deceptive red-eyes, but generally, if most of them, you can have pretty good whiskers unless it's molting, especially or particularly a very young bird. We don't get a whole lot of that. So it tends to be a little browner in general. Again, less contrast here, often kind of dull, but here's a honker of a bill there. So on the left, black-whiskered. Can't see the whisker real well here, but it is present and a little less definition there. Typical red-eyed Vireo on the right. Very similar pattern. Again, on the left, black-whiskered, less definition, particularly of the crown, and you don't have as much of that dark lateral crown stripe. Here's the red-eyed. One more time, and they can be kind of greenish and gray, just kind of like a red-eyed. It's not too dissimilar. They can have a little bit of a black eye line, but they've got a nice little whisker mark. Now, here's a nice bird. This bird was actually banded this August, last August at Fort Morgan. 2 birds came together, were banded together in August, which was incredible, down with T.J. Zenzel and the Southern Miss group. So this is from a great article by Cardiff and Dittman on the LOS website about large eye-line Vireo identification. I suggest you look at that, but I poached this off their thing. But here's yellow-green, Yucatan, but here's black-whiskered, and tends to be a little bit bigger bill. Also a little thinner, it's longer bill, but also a little from below it's thinner. A lot of times from the side it looks fatter. Now, sometimes we try to figure out which of the 2 subspecies are up in our area. There are 6 subspecies. 2 have occurred in this region, and the one that's kind of more expected is Barbatulus, the bird that breeds in Florida. That would be kind of what you would expect. And the other birds that breed in the larger islands of the northern Caribbean, like Puerto Rico and Hispaniola, is the nominate form, Autolocus. And I won't get too much into this because I know we're kind of running along on time, but basically Autolocus tends to be bigger, longer build, less well-defined, buffier, browner, everything a little more buffy, less well-defined, whereas Barbatulus is a little closer looking to a red-eyed and not quite as big a build. Now, having said that, there's some debate about how well they've how well we can tell these. I tend to lean toward one or the other, but I have some trouble sometimes just saying absolutely this is one or the other in these subspecies because there's a lot of variability. There are specimens of this Caribbean, what we call the Caribbean form, even though Barbatulus breeds in the Caymans and Cuba, so it actually breeds there. But in that other form for Louisiana and Northwest Florida, none. There are banded birds that are thought to be this otter form, the browner one. But here's in Alabama, but that's not like proven with a specimen. So Barbatulus on the left, the Florida bird. Here's the Autolocus, the more quote Caribbean form. This browner tends to be a little bigger build. These are all tendencies. Again, here on the left is the what you might expect bird. Still has a big bill, but a little more red-eyed looking. And here's this big brown thing with a giant bill. And these birds I'm showing you here are from the breeding ground, so I feel pretty comfortable that they're actually real. But then you get into these. What's this guy on the left? Well, this is a bird in June in Florida, in a mangrove. Pretty brown bird, pretty big bill. Not terribly well-defined, a little well-defined, but I mean, not that much difference between this bird and that bird. And this is an Autolocus that's from Puerto Rico, I think, or Dominican Republic. So it ain't easy. And there's some people that feel like it's really hard to tell those apart. And I don't know. I just urge caution to really come down hard on it. Now, red-eyed vireos can be a little deceptive. You need to watch them. Probably, if you think you have a black-whiskered, if you have a black-whiskered, you'll probably know it. There are a few birds that are duller and you can't tell the whiskers as much, but you can get faked out by black-whiskers. By red eyes looking like black-whiskered. Now, this bird isn't much of one, but he's got a little line right there, a little darkish, and his almost looks a little more brown, and that, it's not as big build. Here's what you can get fooled by is a separation between these feather tracks here at the malar, and especially if the bird's wet, it could look like it's got a line. Here's birds with sort of some little lines coming down, and you can actually get dark coming down from the lowers a little bit on a red-eyed. Here's another bird with this dusky kind of interface, so you got to watch it move around and study it some. Black-whiskereds, you don't hear them. I've never heard of black-whiskered in Alabama. I've heard them in other places down in the Caribbean, but it has a little more choppy, clipped, bouncy kind of song. And the Whip Tom Kelly is the classic rendition of it. Here is a black-whiskered singing. So I'll play that again. Notice the bird we're actually looking at is not the bird singing, but it's Whip Tom Kelly, Tom Kelly. It's not massively different from red-eyed, but it's a little more clipped and not quite as sweet, or not quite. It's a little more cut off. So now we get to something that if y'all see that, please give me a shout, because this is one that is a really mega, at least in Alabama, but it's certainly anywhere in the northern Gulf, is a really nice find, is yellow-green vireo. This bird is found in basically Mexico and Central America. It's the only Central American bird which completely departs Central America to go to South America in the wintertime. So all of these birds come down here. Every last one of them, evidently. So, and that's pretty unusual for a tropical type thing to do that. Even the ones down in Costa Rica and Panama evidently leave. In Alabama, there's one record. We have one banded record. We're actually going to see some pictures of that bird. But just over to the east in Northwest Florida, there's 7 records. The Duncans have this as a yard bird. Of course, what haven't the Duncans had as a yard bird? I mean, it's a great yard. So, but I mean, they've had this, I think, more than once in their yard. There's several, maybe, I don't know, 5 records for a Gulf breeze, and or something like that. And it's sort of a spring, actually into June for yellow greens. 3 subspecies, really just one to deal with, and a couple are on some islands. And it tends to be in a more open breeding situation in terms of sort of open tree type thing and riparian stuff. So Yellow-green. This is the one that was banded at Fort Morgan by the sergeants. Big bruiser of a bird, long, large bills, often palish kind of bill, stout. Iris is red or reddish on the adult. Some of them, they usually have less facial contrast that are red-eyed. They can still have a little bit of a line here, but it's usually not so much of a line. They have a more gray on the side of the face a lot of times than the olive often you see with red-eyed Vireo, and less contrasting everything most of the time. And the gray of the face often contrasts with all this yellowish in the body. Now, the upper parts often are thought to be more yellow-green in a yellow-green Vireo, and they can be, but it's not reliable. So there's some pretty bright yellowish, greenish upper parts on red-eyes. There's some often have a little more yellow in the wings. There's more yellow, especially underneath on the tail. And the big thing, though, on yellow-green Vireo ID is the extent of yellow. Red-eyed can be yellow all through here. Bright, I'm talking about bright yellow, not green. But if you see yellow going, bright yellow going way up here on the upper breast and sides of the neck and face, that shouldn't be happening with a red-eyed Vireo. If you see that, you better be looking at this bird a little closer. It just shouldn't be. It certainly also shouldn't cross the breast. This crosses it right here. So on the left, the red-eyed Vireo, very subdued face pattern, big pale bill, all this bright yellow coming up and intersecting with the face. Here's olive green up here, but not all this big swath of yellow that coming up. Again, the same type of thing here on the yellow green, and typical. There's both of them have a little yellow right under the wing here, the bend of the wing, but not olivey, greeny, but not bright yellow. Here's another look at the yellow green. So it again, more of a pale face. This is the bird from Fort Morgan. This on both sides. You can see this big bill, very bright bird. This was in the fall in October. And here's a couple of other examples showing the underparts pattern, the face patterns. Still, they can have a little bit of a lateral crown stripe. This one's not particularly yellowish. This maybe well, it's not a young bird because it's got a bright red iris. Back to the Dittman drawings in the Cardiff and Dittman article. This shows the striped stuff. The hatching is the extent of yellow that can often be seen with yellow-green. You're not going to see it up in here on a red-eyed, not bright yellow. This is the usual extent for red-eyed, though it can come up a little bit more than that. The song of the yellow-green is a lot less musical than red-eyed. Still has phrases, but it tends to be more rapid. And it sorts, to me, sounds like a house sparrow. I know other people have talked about that. Here's a yellow-green Vireo singing. So that's, as you can tell, it's a little more, sounds kind of like a house sparrow singing, an energetic house sparrow singing. So, okay, we're about done, folks. I know you're about to die. I hope there's still somebody left. I haven't even been looking. I hope there's somebody left alive over here. Anybody alive?
Everybody.
Oh, I'm looking up. Dana's waving.
We're here.
You're still there. Oh, okay.
We're here.
Well, that's good. That's good. So we're almost done. This is going, of course, longer than I thought, but I'll try to bang through these real quickly because we've never had these in Alabama or Northwest Florida. Can always dream of such things. Black-cap Vireo, thick-billed Vireo, Yucatan Vireo, Cuban Vireo, all of these have been found somewhere in the Southeast. So they're all sort of maybe possible. Well, maybe not so much Cuban Vireo, but anyway, all this one, black-cap, thick-billed, and Cuban all have a strong dark break above the eye. And we'll see that. But if you see a spectacle or an eye ring with a great big dark obvious break above the eye, look at that bird again because it may be something weird. So we'll start with black-cap Vireo. It's the only Vireo that has different sexually dimorphic. Males and females are different. It's also the only Vireo with what they call delayed plumage maturation, which is the males don't, even some of the second year males are not fully mature. So in terms of their plumage. So it's a kind of an odd little bird, I think more related to a dwarf Vireo of Oaxaca than they are of some of these others. But the song uses some burry and twittering notes. We won't go into that much. Black-capped, basically, I've never seen black-capped. I've never been in this part of the world. I've been in this part of the world, but never saw one wintering. They're not. You don't see them that much in winter. But Oklahoma, Texas, down into New Mexico, there is one. There's a Louisiana record and a site record for coastal Mississippi. So actually a pretty good site record. So, I guess it's possible. Basically a small, active little bird, short tail, short bills, a small bill, little bitty guy. Adults, they basically have red iris, but they're less so in the immatures. Very contrasty face pattern. Males are pretty obvious with a black head. Females, though, we'll see in a second, are grayish. But look at this black spot above the eye. See that dark break above the eye like that? Here's a female that's got a grayish head, still has the break above the eye, but then the rest of it, almost everything else around, basically the rest of around the eye is all very bright white. And contrast a lot, the gray or black contrast with the green. There's yellow underneath like this. A lot of contrast going on in this bird. Immature females can be more sort of buffy though, so they're not quite as bright. So they, in a way, especially the females, look a little bit like a blue-headed Vireo, but the black cap over here on the left is a female or immature. And there's some differences. The black-cap's a much smaller bird, much more active. The bluehead is a chunkier bird. Similar pattern in terms of greenish and yellowish and grayish and spectacles. But notice again on the black-cap, break above the eye. And also a thing, look at the bluehead. It's got a little break in front of the eye too that this doesn't have. So the face pattern is actually fairly different, even though superficially they're similar. You could almost equate this to a kinglet, and some of the dull females, dull immatures could look like that. But kinglets have this dark bar here, thin little bill without a hook, different facial patterns, stronger. It does have a break above the eye. So I guess that would be the exception. If you see a break above the eye, think of kinglets first. But all right, so now we got thick-billed Vireo. This bird is increasing in southern Florida. It was like crazy rare, and now it seems like there's one or two there every winter and spring, and sometimes fall, and it's showing up more. All the records seem to be from the Bahamas. Basically, it's where it breeds. Is the Bahamas are some assorted islands, and there's 5 subspecies, which is a little weird because I guess mostly because there's all these island groups involved. Wood scrubs, similar, a little maybe to white-eyed Vireo sound, a little harsher. So thick-billed, a little bit bigger than a white-eyed, heavier build, thick-billed, makes sense. Thick neck, got a dark iris, maybe a little pale, but basically has got to have a dark iris. But remember, young white-eyes also have a dark iris. Got a very thick yellow superloral, but then a whitish, little thin whitish eye ring, a little different from the white-eyed pattern. And again, this strong break above the eye. Here's the little kind of whitish behind, little thin eye ring, big yellow here, big break above the eye. Doesn't have much contrast. Doesn't have much contrast above, doesn't have much contrast below. Remember, white-eyeds have got the usually have bright yellow contrasting flanks and breast size. This is just sort of a dull thing, but very bright wing bars. So white-eyed on the right, thick-billed on the left. Here's, again, the facial pattern difference. This was a little more yellow here, but it's still thin and got that very strong break and just a dull, kind of dull all over. This is a lot more contrasty. Now, there are some immature white-eyes that are less contrasty than this, but you get the general idea. Some thick-bills are a lot more yellow underneath, all underneath, kind of diffusely done. But again, the face pattern like that compared to the white eye on the right, same thing here. We got thick-billed on the left, kind of a dull bird with this kind of a weird face pattern. And here's a white-eyed with yellow, but there's, you know, it's complete there, or pretty much so. So here's just a couple more thick bills just to show the kind of the variation going on. And a couple more just to show those kind of a look. So if you see a bird with a weird face pattern with a break up there, take a look at it. All right, we got two more quick birds, and this is going to be fast. Yucatan Vireo. Well, kind of weird looking bird. Stripy, brown, drab, big bill. So it lives on the coast of the Yucatan and Quintana Roo and down into Belize, and also strangely in the Cayman Islands. Voice is kind of similar to a black-whiskered, supposedly sedentary, but there's a record for Galveston. So in the spring. So, I think it's supposed to be a pretty good record. So it is possible one could get up here, even though it doesn't really migrate. And it's a big, like I say, it's a big bird, big thick-billed bird, large, long, red-eyed type. Kind of looks like a black-whiskered vireo without a whisker, basically. The iris is dark, though. This looks brown. It's not red. It doesn't have a red iris. And it's dingy. It reminds me a little bit of a Swainson's warbler in the way of the head pattern and the body, the way it looks. Of course, the bill's different. Little, if any, lateral crown stripe, just prominent buff, lots of stripes, especially really dark lowers, big stripy look to the face, and of course, no, doesn't have much contrast here, and no stripe. So here's another Yucatan Vireo, big billed bird. So basically, if you see a brown black-whiskered Vireo without a black whisker at all, and is really big billed, pay attention to it. So here's the second bird. Here is the Yucatan Vireo out of Dittman's drawing. And you can see the very dark lowers and very contrasty face. And here's black whiskered. Doesn't have quite as strong a face pattern except for that whisker. Okay, our last bird, and this is talking about dream birds. I've never seen this bird. Andrew's probably seen it, like, you know, this probably every time he goes down to Cuba, I mean, he's probably has them, you know, in his room, coming into the room with him. But this is a Cuban Vireo that's occurred at least twice. I don't know. I didn't look it up, but maybe 3 times in southern Florida recently, since say like 2016. It basically lives in Cuba and the little cays around it. And oddly has 4 subspecies that it is sometimes just lumped in with white-eyed, has a little whistle song. It's similar to a white-eyed in size. It's dull, very faint wing bars. Again, look at this break above the eye, big crescent behind the eye, big whitish crescent behind the eye, and sort of a spot or a crescent in front. But again, very dull wing bars and that big dark break above the eye. This bird actually does have a little bit of a reddish eye here. If you notice, it does have a red eye, but it's not even remotely similar to that red-eyed group of birds. It's more like the black cap in that respect. So here's again Cuban Vireo, big crescent, kind of a crescent here, and a dark spot, similar look here, spot, dark, and dull, dingy below, dingy above, not contrasty. And y'all are survived. Anybody that's still there gets a win. This is basically you've survived a talk on differentiating, you know, brown paper bags. So that's what you. I hope that's just been as clear as mud. But any questions about any of this stuff? I mean, that's.
Thanks, Greg. Why don't you not stop the screen share? And then we
Okay. All right.
Trying to unmute.
So thank you for your attention. I appreciate the thing. Hope this was of some use. And Jeff, you can stop recording.
Thank you. I will stop.
And press save, because I'd like to have a copy of this.
Yeah, we can make it into an MPEG if I can.
Greg?